Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. With recent events that have been going on, I'm sure that I'm not the only one that has noticed some really absurd things that are being pushed on us that a lot of people are blindly obeying. And I was thinking to myself, how could this possibly be? And then I realized this. We've been trained to obey. I hope that I'm not the only one that has seen some really strange things that are being mandated to us around the country right now. Things that don't seem to make any sense at all, but that people really seem to be following without even asking questions. And it really gets me frustrated because I think to myself, how can people just stand for this and not say anything and think that it's okay? And then I realized we have actually been trained to obey, starting right at the beginning of our time in school. And, I was actually starting to relate our time in school to actual obedience schools for dogs. Because what do dogs learn in obedience school? They learn how to follow commands. Sometimes it might be, little hand signals. Sometimes it might be a word like heel. And they are learned to respond in a similar way. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that we are brought up with, not only in school, but that are happening to us out in the outside world right now, have all of the same markings of the sort of things that go on when people are trying to get their dogs to obey. So, let's just think back to those years that you are in school. So, what are some of the things? What are some of the signals that you might remember that taught you what it is that your teacher expected of you? You have to raise your hand in order to ask a question. A lot of teachers will train their students to put their fingers on their lips when they are walking through the hallway to signal them not to speak. Some other teachers, I know some of my kids' teachers used to do a little clapping signal to let their kids know that it was time to pay attention. They would just do this little clap and then all the kids had to do it back. And that meant that they had to be quiet. And, a lot of this stuff seems to make sense, because it is more orderly if students raise their hand to go to the bathroom. Sometimes having the finger on the lips does help children. It's a physical reminder of children to not speak in times when they need to be quiet. And, a lot of kids find the whole clapping signal fun. They think that it's fun to do these things. So yeah, a lot of these things really do seem to work. But a lot of them, or not work, seem to make sense. But a lot of them don't. There are so many things that we're told to do in our time in school, or that our children are told to do in their time in school, that really can have no other objective in mind than to just teach students to obey. And this is something, again, you start from little on up. It goes all throughout school, and I can't even say that it ends. It continues on throughout adulthood, and we'll get to that later. And I'm sure that you might be wondering where I'm going with this, but let's think about this. So I asked on Instagram if anybody had any stories of when they were in kids, or maybe when they were in school, or maybe their kids were in school, and do they have anything that they remember that they or their child was told to do that really seemed to have no other meaning than just to teach them to obey. And I actually have a perfect example of this from my oldest son. When he was in college, he was taking a class online, and throughout the semester, every single thing that he did was online. All of the tests were submitted online. All of the papers were submitted online. All of the assignments, everything was submitted online. And then the final was even submitted. Actually, I'm sorry. He had to complete it online. But then here's the kicker. He was supposed to print it up then. And then he was supposed to drive it to the school, to the college, to then hand it in person to the professor. And we lived like half an hour away from the college. And I said to him, I don't get it. You have done everything online for this entire semester. Why does she want you to take this very last thing that you have to turn in? Why does she want you to drive all the way there just to hand it into her on, in person? And she wouldn't make any exceptions either. It was part of the final grade, was handing it into her personally. And it was then that I even said to my son, you know that the only reason they're doing this is because she wants to teach you to be obedient. And my son said, I know that's what it's about. And I got more responses on Instagram than I ever thought that I would. I think I got like 38 responses. So obviously I can't go through all of them right now, but I do want to give you some examples of some of the things that kids are told to do in school that honestly seem to have no other purpose than to teach obedience. So let me just start out with this one. This is also something that my daughter went through, but someone else mentioned this in one of the Instagram comments. She said that her 4th grade daughter was in gifted math, and the teacher would assign homework and then would never check it. That they could write anything. They could show the same homework every single day, and the teacher would give them credit for it. And that is exactly what my daughter went through. When she was in 8th grade, she was in honors algebra. And she used to tell me how the teacher would assign homework, and all she would do was every day she would walk around the class just to make sure that someone had something written down on a piece of paper, and she would give them credit for doing their work. She never went over it, so the kids never knew whether they got it right or not. And they never actually found out if they actually understood it until they took the test. And, that's not a really good way to teach if kids aren't finding out until the test whether or not they understand something. And in fact, I ended up having to repeat algebra with my daughter. I took her out to homeschool her then for all of high school, and we ended up repeating 9th grade algebra. But why? What would be the purpose of assigning all of this homework to these students if the teacher doesn't even care whether or not they did it correctly or whether or not they really even did it at all? I think that, these kids could have shown her anything. And I think that, she was really indifferent to it. And I'm sure that it was the same way with this little girl that I mentioned. There is no other reason that a teacher would do this other than for the sheer fact that they can. They can assign this work, and maybe they're even told to assign this work. But in the end, if they're not checking it, if they're not going over it and don't have the slightest care about whether or not anyone understands it, there can only be one alternative. They're doing it to get kids to be obedient. Another example was someone wrote about how she had to write the state capitals every single night on top of 4 to 5 hours of homework. This was every night. Had to write all the state capitals in addition to all of their other homework. And I can understand if you're going through, if you're doing a lesson or you're doing some sort of unit study, although I don't think schools really do what are called unit studies, but if they're learning the state or the capitals, fine. But this was something that went on all year long. And to me, this is what is considered to be busy work. It's just something to fill up the time. And considering that they are having these kids fill up this extra time at home on top of other work that they've already assigned, what could be any alternative, especially if they had done it all year? I'm sure that they had them memorized by that point. Why else would they have to have them write it every single day? It was to teach the students to do as they are told. It is conditioning. It is social engineering. Someone else wrote about how when she was in college, a teacher gave everyone a syllabus test. And the only reason that she gave the syllabus test was to check to make sure that the kids read, not the kids, because this is college by now, but young adults. She wanted to make sure that they read their syllabuses. I don't think that's plural, but anyway, she wanted to make sure that they had read their syllabus. And so she tested them on it. No other reason. She didn't want to go over the syllabus, so she just tested the students on it. And here is the last one. Actually, second last one. One person who wrote in said that her teacher had actually given her an alternative. She could either pee her pants or she could get detention for interrupting class to go to the bathroom. What other purpose would it be than to condition children to do as they're told? Pee your pants, get detention. It doesn't seem like much of an option, does it? Then we have the students where they are getting math problems marked wrong. And this is actually something that my son, who has ADHD, when he was in school, this was an issue that he also dealt with. When these kids do their math problems, they might get their answer correct. The teachers mark them wrong. Why? Because they did not do them the way that they were supposed to. That is a blatant example of teaching to obey. To the teachers, it does not matter if the kids arrived at the correct answer. It matters to them how they arrived at that answer, which really can be disastrous for a lot of kids, especially for kids, like I mentioned, who have ADHD, because they think differently. And this is something that is really happening a lot now that Common Core is implemented, because Common Core is a lot of really, I'll just say, puzzling pathways to get the answers to different questions. And if a child is getting marked wrong for correct answers just because they didn't arrive at it the way that they were supposed to, you can't get much more of an obedience lesson out of that. Oh, and I do have one more. Someone said that she actually once had to give a report, and this was everyone in the class, I believe, not just her, had to give a report with a bag on her head. Yes, a bag on her head. What other purpose could that possibly have? So, the thing is that a lot of these things that I've talked about, like I mentioned before, they do seem to have some sort of other purpose besides teaching obedience. Like, they definitely teach kids to obey, but they have another purpose, like raising the hands because it helps to keep order, like maybe giving a child a bathroom pass or having a child sign out for the bathroom. They're teaching them that they have to get that permission, but at the same time, it helps, to not have children running around through the school all the time. So so there are a lot of things that do teach obedience that have a purpose. But the things that I'm really focusing on are these things that I mentioned that really seem to have no other reason but to condition people to obey, to do as they're told. And here's where we get back to this pandemic, because that's what I started out with. This completely answers the obedience question when it comes to the pandemic. I told you, I'm always thinking to myself, how can people just stand by and do this nonsense? How can they listen to these mandates that really make no sense? They don't even question them. A lot of times they'll be standing up for these governors who are taking their rights away left and right. But they will stand up for them and they will fight tooth and nail for that governor who is taking away their rights, and the governor who in fact doesn't even listen to their own mandates. And so here's the thing. A lot of these mandates on the surface, if you are someone who really doesn't look into things yourself and kind of just believes what you're told, a lot of the things on the surface do seem to make sense. Masks, if there's a pandemic going around, like many people believe, then they think that the masks are protecting them. And this is going actually right back into that obedience training. Because remember how I was talking about how when dogs are trained in obedience school, they use certain hand signals, they use certain words? That is exactly how we are being trained to behave during this situation. So we hear things like, we're all in this together. My mask protects you, your mask protects me. We wear our masks out of love. These are all neurolinguistic signals to get you to do what they want you to do. And so when someone sees something like a mask, that might have another reason for them. But there are a lot of things that are going on that make absolutely no sense at all. And this is where I'm coming back to those things in school that I talked about that we're taught to just do, even though we probably deep down inside, even when we're kids, we know that there is literally no reason that we need to be doing these things. But yet we're brought up on this for so long that at this point in time, you reach adulthood and some people are so well trained by this point in time that they will do anything that they are told. They fall for those signals much more quickly than some people. Let's just think about some of the really nonsensical orders that are being issued. Like, no Thanksgiving. They didn't want you to have anyone over for Thanksgiving, but Black Friday shopping was totally fine. 10 p.m. curfews. How does that make any sense? How does this virus somehow know that it can really go after people if they're out after 10 p.m.? Or let's talk about that you can take your masks off while you're sitting at restaurants. So, I was shopping the other day at Walmart, and there's a Subway in front of the Walmart, and everybody's walking around Walmart with their masks on and everything, because here in Pennsylvania, the masks are mandated. Yet people are sitting right in the Subway and no masks on. Why? Because they're sitting down in a restaurant and they're allowed to have their masks off while they're sitting there. How does that make a difference? How would that help to stop the spread between whether someone is walking or sitting? And the same thing goes with church. Wear a mask when you're walking into church. Into the church building, you have to wear a mask. But when you sit down in your pew, you can take your mask off then, because then it's safe. But unless you're going to sing. If you're going to sing, then you need to put your mask back on. These are the sorts of things that we are being told right now, and that so many people are doing unquestioningly. And I've realized now that's why. And unfortunately, a lot of the younger generation, a lot of like the high schoolers and a lot of kids who are freshly out of high school, I keep calling them kids, but they are kids to me. They really, really, really seem to be hanging on to every bit of these mandates that we have. But we have to look at this. We've had Common Core going on in these schools for how long? And the Common Core really is all about obedience training with nonsensical lessons. That's what it's all about. And on top of that, we've got all of these other really, questionable curriculums that are being implemented in these schools that, again, really have nothing to do with academics, but are everything about social engineering. So unfortunately, these kids who are still in school and who are freshly graduated, they have gotten probably more indoctrination than any older adult. And you know what? It's time that we realize this. Think back to all of the time that you spent in school. Think back to all of these signals that we see everywhere, all of the commercials, the ads on TV. They're constantly reminding us of the things they want us to do. Same thing as obedience school for dogs. Break free from the indoctrination. Really, you've got to start using your common sense again. Look at some things you might think, okay, well, that makes a little bit of sense, so I don't care if I do this. And if you want to do that, that's fine. But really, you have got to have the I don't even know what word I want to use, but you've got to use your mind. You have got to look at these things that really don't make sense at all, like 10 p.m. curfews, like that's somehow going to protect you. Learn to question things, because if we continue on this path where most people refuse to question anything and will just do whatever they're told, at least I will be running the opposite direction, but we will have a lot of sheep running right off a cliff. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one over on Instagram, because YouTube disables my comments. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.